He stood in the center of New York's most exclusive restaurant, a symbol of power and success, holding a diamond ring that glittered with the fire of 1,000 captured stars. He was about to place it on the finger of his mistress, a public declaration of his new life, his new love. The crowd was captivated, their phones recording the audacious spectacle. But what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the woman who had just walked in, the wife he had so casually discarded, wasn't just there to witness her humiliation. She was there to collect her property, because she didn't just own the ring, she owned the entire multi-billion-dollar brand that created it. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of a queen taking back her kingdom, one carat at a time. The low hum of contented wealth filled the cavernous space of La Lanterne d'Or. Crystal glasses chimed with the sound of celebratory toasts, and the murmur of discreet conversation wove itself into the soft melodies drifting from a grand piano tucked away in a velvet-draped alcove. This was Jonathan Davenport's natural habitat. He thrived in these environments, places where a man's worth could be measured by the cut of his suit, the vintage of his wine, and the beauty of the woman on his arm. Tonight, he was a king surveying his court, and the woman on his arm was Penelope Vance. Penelope was a masterpiece of modern ambition. Her blonde hair was styled into an impossibly sleek cascade that fell over the bare skin of her back, exposed by a shimmering emerald gown that clung to her every curve. She was 28, 2 decades younger than Jonathan, and she looked at him with an intoxicating blend of awe and adoration that he had long ceased to see in his wife's eyes. He sipped his Chateau Margaux, the dark liquid a perfect complement to the smug satisfaction warming his chest. "Are you nervous, darling?" Penelope whispered, her fingers tracing the lapel of his Tom Ford suit. Jonathan chuckled, a deep, confident sound. "Nervous? Penelope, I've orchestrated multi-billion-dollar mergers. This is a pleasure." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "This is for us. A public statement. No more hiding in the shadows. The world needs to see who the real man of the hour is, and who his leading lady will be." Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, widened with a carefully practiced innocence. "Oh, Jonathan, you're too much." But she didn't mean it. She loved that he was too much. His extravagance was her validation. Every expensive gift, every exclusive reservation, was another brick in the foundation of the life she was meticulously building for herself, a life far removed from her middle-class upbringing in Ohio. Across town, in a brightly lit studio in the meatpacking district that smelled of metal polish and focused creativity, Catherine Reyes was oblivious to the drama about to unfold. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple, elegant knot, and a pair of artisan's goggles were pushed up onto her forehead. Her hands, graceful but strong, moved with a familiar certainty over a wax model of a new earring design. This was her sanctuary, the heart of Reyes Jewels, the company her father, the legendary Hector Reyes, had founded, and she had built into a global empire. Reyes Jewels wasn't just another luxury brand, it was an institution. Each piece told a story, infused with a soul that mass-produced jewelry could never replicate. Catherine was the keeper of that soul, while Jonathan, her husband of 19 years, handled the aggressive business strategies and public relations as CEO. She was the architect, the artist, the very essence of the brand. Her phone buzzed on the workbench, and she glanced at the screen. Samantha Jones, her head of operations and closest friend. She swiped to answer, placing it on speaker. "Burning the midnight oil again, Kat?" Sam's voice was warm but laced with its usual no-nonsense tone. "Just refining the Persephone collection. The clasp on the locket isn't right. It feels weak, Catherine replied, her eyes not leaving the delicate piece in her hands. You're the only person on earth who would lose sleep over the tensile strength of a locket clasp, Sam said with a laugh. There was a pause. Hey, speaking of things that aren't right, I was going over the quarterly expense reports for the executive accounts. Catherine sighed, finally setting the model down. Sam, please tell me this isn't another lecture about Jonathan's entertainment budget. I wish it were that simple. It's not the dinners at Oriole or the fleet of town cars. There's a charge here from our own flagship store, a significant one. It was coded as a promotional acquisition, but it was processed through his private executive account. A single item. A knot of unease tightened in Catherine's stomach. She had been feeling it for months, a persistent, low-grade dread she tried to push away. The late nights Jonathan attributed to investor calls, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his clothes, the emotional chasm that had opened between them, vast and silent. She had chosen to believe his excuses, to immerse herself in her work because the alternative was too painful to contemplate. How significant? Catherine asked, her voice quiet. Star of Serenity significant, Sam replied, naming one of their most exclusive high-carat bespoke pieces, a flawless 15-carat blue diamond set in a platinum band intricately woven with smaller, brilliant-cut stones. It was a masterpiece of design and rarity. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She knew that piece intimately. She had overseen its creation from the initial sketch to the final polish. That piece was commissioned for the vault. It's not for sale. Well, apparently it is now. Or it was. Jonathan authorized the transfer himself 3 days ago. The paperwork is all here, signed and sealed, Sam said, the concern in her voice deepening. Cat, what's going on? Catherine sank onto her stool, the scent of metal polish suddenly cloying, the weak clasp, the late nights, the emotional distance, and now this, a secret, extravagant purchase of one of her own creations. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see. He told me he had a big charity gala tonight, Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper, at La Lanterne d'Or. A heavy silence hung between them. Sam didn't need to say anything more. They both knew. The charity wasn't a cause. It was a woman. The gala wasn't an event. It was a stage. Back at the restaurant, Jonathan signaled the waiter. The moment had arrived. The lights in the dining room dimmed slightly, a prearranged cue. A hush fell over the tables as diners sensed a spectacle was imminent. Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. Penelope, Jonathan began, his voice resonating with theatrical gravity. For too long, I have been living a life of obligation, a life in black and white. You brought the color back. You have shown me what true passion, true partnership can be. He reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a small velvet box. It was a deep navy blue, the signature color of Rhea's jewels. Penelope gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. This was it, the culmination of all her efforts, the ultimate prize. Jonathan's eyes gleamed with triumph as he opened the box. Nestled inside, the Star of Serenity diamond drank the light of the room and threw it back in a dazzling, fiery explosion of blue and white brilliance. It was more magnificent than she could have ever imagined. With the entire restaurant watching, with dozens of phones held aloft recording his every move, Jonathan Davenport slid off his chair and knelt on one knee before his mistress. "Penelope Vance," he declared, his voice booming in the quiet room, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" 19 years ago, Jonathan Davenport had been different. Or maybe, Catherine often thought, he had been the same man. But she had been a different woman, one who saw him through a filter of youthful optimism and shared dreams. They had met at a gallery opening in Soho. He was a junior investment banker then, sharp and ambitious, with a smile that could disarm a hostile boardroom. She was the quiet, intense daughter of the great Hector Reyes, more comfortable at a jeweler's bench than at a cocktail party. He had been fascinated by her world. He didn't just see the sparkle of the finished gems, he saw the fire, the pressure, the meticulous art that transformed a rough stone into a thing of beauty. He would sit for hours in her father's workshop, asking intelligent questions, his eyes alight with genuine curiosity. He hadn't just courted her. He had courted her craft. He saw the potential in Rhea's jewels long before she did. "Your father is a master artist, Kat," he'd told her one evening, his hand covering hers over a table cluttered with sketches. "But this is more than a workshop. It's a legacy. It's a brand. It could be the biggest name in haute joaillerie, bigger than Cartier, bigger than Van Cleef and Arpels." She had been swept away by his vision, his energy. Her father was a purist, content with his bespoke clientele and his sterling reputation. Jonathan saw a global empire. When they married, he brought his business acumen to her artistic heritage. At first, it was a perfect partnership. After Hector Reyes passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years into their marriage, Catherine was devastated, lost in a sea of grief. Jonathan stepped in, a pillar of strength. He took the reins of the business side, assuming the title of CEO, allowing her to grieve and to focus on what she did best: design. "You are the soul of this company, my love," he had assured her. "Let me be the shield. I'll handle the boring stuff, the supply chains, the marketing budgets, the expansion plans. You just create. Create the beauty only you can." And so she had. Under their dual leadership, Rhea's jewels exploded. They opened flagships in Paris, London, and Tokyo. Their pieces adorned royalty and Hollywood A-listers. Jonathan became a celebrated figure in the business world, lauded for his Midas touch, his aggressive and brilliant strategies that had turned a respected family business into a billion-dollar powerhouse. But slowly, subtly, the narrative began to shift. In interviews, our vision became my strategy. Catherine's design became the product my creative team developed. He was the face of the company, the charismatic rainmaker. She, by her own preference for privacy, became the reclusive genius, the name on the box who was rarely seen. The emotional distance between them grew in direct proportion to the company's stock price. The man who once sat mesmerized in her workshop now barely glanced at her sketches. His late nights, once spent with her poring over designs, were now spent at business dinners she was never invited to. The shared passion that had been the bedrock of their relationship was gone, replaced by a polite, professional courtesy. They were partners in business, but strangers in life. Their sprawling penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, once a warm home filled with laughter and collaborative energy, had become a gilded cage. It was a showroom for their success, impeccably decorated, yet cold and silent. Catherine found her solace not there, but in the controlled, creative chaos of her private studio. Her work was the one thing that was still truly hers, a direct connection to her father and to the woman she used to be. The rhythmic scrape of a file against metal, the precise click of a setting tool. These were the sounds of her real life. She had tried to ignore the warning signs, burying her hurt and loneliness in the intricate details of a new collection. When a friend had mentioned seeing Jonathan laughing intimately with a young blonde at a polo match in the Hamptons, Catherine had dismissed it as a business meeting. When she found a receipt for a lavish dinner for two at a restaurant she'd never been to, she'd accepted his flimsy excuse about entertaining a client. To acknowledge the truth would be to admit that the entire edifice of her life was a lie. It was easier to believe in the illusion than to face the shattering reality. But the purchase of the Star of Serenity was different. It wasn't just an extravagant expense. It was a violation. That diamond was more than just a stone. It was a symbol, a piece of her family's history. Her father had acquired the raw 50-carat diamond years ago, calling it his someday stone. He believed a gem of that magnitude and unique color had to wait for the perfect design, the perfect moment. After he died, the stone sat in the master vault, a silent, blue-flamed tribute to his legacy. 2 years ago, for their anniversary, Catherine had finally felt ready to honor it. She had designed the Star of Serenity, setting herself, a deeply personal project. The intricate platinum weave was meant to represent their two lives intertwining, the smaller, brilliant-cut diamonds, the highlights of their journey together. It was a testament, she had believed, to a love that, though strained, was enduring. She had shown the designs to Jonathan, and he had been uncharacteristically moved. "It's magnificent, Cat." "Truly," he had said, his voice thick with an emotion she now realized was entirely fraudulent. "Let's keep it safe, for a special occasion. For us." Now, he was taking that symbol of us and using it as a prop in a tawdry public spectacle. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was desecrating her father's memory and perverting her own art. He was using the very soul of her life's work to destroy her. The hurt was a physical thing, a white-hot blade twisting in her gut. But as she sat there in the silence of her studio, the pain began to cool, solidifying into something else. It was no longer the fragile grief of a betrayed wife. It was the cold, hard fury of a queen whose castle was under siege. She stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She walked over to a full-length mirror and looked at her reflection. She saw the smudge of graphite on her cheek and the fatigue in her eyes. This was not the image of a victim. This was the creator, the architect, the true owner of the Reyes legacy. Jonathan had made a fatal miscalculation. He had mistaken her quiet nature for weakness. He had forgotten that the same hands that could shape delicate filigree could also crush stone. "Sam," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier tremor, now imbued with an icy resolve. "Get the car. We're going to a gala." "What are you going to do?" Sam asked, a hint of awe in her voice. "He wants to make a public statement," Catherine replied, pulling the goggles from her hair and letting it fall around her shoulders. "I'm going to give him one." La Lanterne d'Or was not merely a restaurant, it was a theatre, and its proprietor, Pierre, was a master of stagecraft. The lighting was an intimate, honeyed gold. The tables were spaced far enough apart for secrets to be whispered, but close enough for grand gestures to be witnessed by all. Tonight, the main performance was at Table 12, center stage. The occasion was the annual Gems of the City fundraiser, a black tie event benefiting youth arts programs, a cause Jonathan Davenport championed with loud, public donations that bought him priceless social capital. It was the perfect backdrop for his personal drama. Penelope felt like she was floating. The champagne, the admiring glances from other tables, the weight of Jonathan's hand on the small of her back. It was all intoxicating. She saw her reflection in the polished surface of a silver wine chiller and smiled. This was the woman she was meant to be. Confident, desired, dripping in luxury. The woman who had won. She knew Jonathan was married. He had painted a bleak picture of a cold, passionless relationship with a woman who was, in his words, married to her work. He had described Catherine as a recluse, a fragile artist who had retreated from the world after her father's death, leaving him to run their empire alone. Penelope felt a flicker of pity for the poor woman, but it was quickly extinguished by her own soaring ambition. Jonathan tapped his glass with a fork, and the gentle chime silenced the room. He rose, a broad, confident smile on his face. The diners, a mix of New York's financial elite and old-money philanthropists, turned their attention to him. He was a popular figure, known for his charm and his company's spectacular success. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support such a worthy cause. We are here to celebrate art, to nurture the creative spark in the next generation. And in that spirit, I find myself moved to celebrate a more personal work of art." He turned his gaze to Penelope, and her breath hitched. This was more than she had expected. "For a long time," he continued, his voice taking on a confessional tone, "my life was governed by duty, by legacy. I helped build an empire of beautiful things, but my own world felt hollow. And then I met someone who is herself a masterpiece, someone who reminded me that the most precious gems are not the ones we pull from the earth, but the ones we are lucky enough to find in people: passion, vitality, and a love for life." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. This was far more personal than the usual corporate benefactor speech. Across the room, the venerable Mr. Bartholomew, a titan of the luxury goods industry and an old friend of Catherine's father, watched with a deeply furrowed brow, his expression unreadable. Jonathan's hand dipped into his pocket. "And so tonight, as we celebrate new beginnings for the young artists of our city, I want to mark a new beginning for myself." He produced the navy velvet box. A collective gasp went through the room. Penelope felt a dizzying rush of triumph. He was doing it here, in front of everyone. It was a power move, a definitive severing of his past, and a bold claiming of his future with her. He opened the box. The star of serenity ignited under the soft lights. Its blue fire was hypnotic, otherworldly. It was the most beautiful thing Penelope had ever seen. The sheer size and brilliance of it sent another shockwave through the audience. This was not just a ring. It was a statement of unimaginable wealth and intent. This was a queen's ransom. With practiced grace, Jonathan lowered himself to one knee. The flashes of camera phones, previously discreet, now became a strobe-lit frenzy. The moment was being captured, broadcast, immortalized. "Penelope Vance," he proclaimed, his voice ringing with the sincerity of a seasoned performer. "You have shown me what it means to truly live. Will you make me the happiest man in the world? Will you be my wife?" Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, tears of genuine, overwhelming joy. This was her coronation. She opened her mouth to say the single word that would seal her destiny, the word she had been dreaming of for months. "Yes," she began to breathe out, a soft, eager sound. But the word was swallowed by another voice. A voice that was not loud, but carried with such clarity and authority that it sliced through the captivated silence of the room like a shard of diamond. "That's a beautiful piece, Jonathan. I'm glad you appreciate my work." Every head in the restaurant turned towards the grand entrance. Standing there, framed by the ornate archway, was Catherine Reyes. She was not what the room expected. Jonathan's descriptions had painted a picture of a mousy, withdrawn woman, a ghost haunting a workshop. The woman who stood before them was anything but. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored black dress that fell to her ankles. It was unadorned, save for a single, breathtaking piece of jewelry, a necklace of her own design, a cascade of white diamonds and sapphires that coiled around her neck like a celestial serpent. Her dark hair was styled in a sleek chignon, and her face, though pale, was a mask of serene composure. She did not look angry or hysterical. She looked like she owned the room. In truth, she owned the very brand that was at the center of the spectacle. Behind her, a step to her left, stood Samantha Jones. In a sharp pantsuit, with a tablet clutched in one hand and an expression of grim satisfaction on her face, Sam looked less like a guest and more like an executioner's aide. Jonathan froze, still on one knee, the ring held aloft. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a mottled, purplish hue of pure shock. It was as if he was seeing an apparition. This was impossible. Catherine never came to these events. She hated the schmoozing, the flash bulbs, the superficiality of it all. She was supposed to be in her studio, safely out of sight, oblivious. Penelope stared, her mind struggling to process the scene. Who was this woman? Her poise, her elegance, the way the entire room's energy had shifted to orbit around her. It sent a prickle of fear up Penelope's spine. She glanced at Jonathan's horrified face, and a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced her triumphant haze. Catherine's eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, swept the room once, acknowledging the audience, before settling on the tableau at table 12. She began to walk forward, her heels clicking with a soft, rhythmic cadence on the marble floor. It was not the hurried, frantic pace of a woman wronged. It was the deliberate, unhurried stride of a predator approaching its cornered prey. The whispers started, low and urgent. That's Catherine Reyes, Hector Reyes's daughter, Jonathan's wife." The last word hung in the air, charged and damning. Catherine reached the table. She didn't look at Jonathan. Her gaze fell upon the ring glittering in the box, and then lifted to meet Penelope's confused and fearful eyes. Catherine's expression was not one of anger, but of something far more unnerving. A clinical, almost pitiful assessment. "He didn't tell you, did he?" Catherine's voice was calm, conversational, yet it carried an edge of steel. "About who I am, or about that ring." Penelope could only shake her head, her fairy tale moment crumbling into a nightmare. Jonathan scrambled to his feet, his face a mess of confusion and burgeoning rage. "Catherine, what in God's name are you doing here?" he hissed, trying to keep his voice low, to contain the escalating disaster. "You're making a scene. This is a private matter." Catherine finally turned her gaze to him. The look in her eyes was one he had never seen before. The warmth, the tolerance, the quiet forbearance. It was all gone. In its place was a chilling clarity, the dispassionate focus of a master jeweler inspecting a flawed stone. "A private matter?" she repeated, her voice still level, but now laced with a potent irony. "You got down on one knee in a room full of people, with cameras flashing, to propose to your mistress using a ring I designed for our 20th wedding anniversary. You made this public, Jonathan. I'm just here to add a little context." The word mistress landed like a physical blow. Penelope flinched, her face flushing with a deep, painful scarlet. The whispers in the room grew louder, more fevered. Mr. Bartholomew, at his corner table, leaned forward, his expression now one of intense, grim fascination. Sam stepped forward slightly, positioning herself to the side, her phone now in her hand, discreetly recording. Not for social media, but for evidence. Catherine had planned every move. This was not a crime of passion. It was a calculated, strategic demolition. The architect had arrived, and she was about to show everyone the fatal flaws in the foundation of the life her husband had built. Jonathan, regaining a sliver of his bravado, tried to seize control. "Catherine, you're being hysterical. You're overwrought. Let's go home and discuss this." He reached for her arm, a gesture of command disguised as concern. Catherine moved her arm away with a motion so fluid and final, it was as if he had touched air. "Don't," she said, the single word sharp enough to make him recoil. "We have nothing to discuss at home. Everything that needs to be said will be said right here." She turned her attention back to Penelope, who looked as if she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Catherine's voice softened, but not with sympathy, with the detached tone of a professor explaining a complex but tragic theorem. "That ring," she began, gesturing towards the box Jonathan still clutched in his trembling hand, "is called the Star of Serenity. The central stone is a 15.2-carat, fancy, vivid blue diamond, internally flawless. My father acquired the rough stone in Botswana over 30 years ago. He never cut it because he was waiting for the right inspiration." She paused, letting the history of the stone sink in. This was not just a product off a shelf. It was a legacy. "I designed that setting myself. Every detail has a meaning. Do you see the interwoven platinum bands?" She looked at Penelope, forcing the younger woman to meet her gaze. They were meant to represent two separate lives twisting together to become stronger. The 19 smaller diamonds embedded along the band, one for each year of our marriage. The hidden sapphire on the inside of the band is my birthstone. I designed it as an anniversary gift. For my husband. From me. Each sentence was a perfectly aimed blow, dismantling Penelope's fantasy piece by piece. The ring on which she had pinned all her hopes was not a symbol of her future, but an artifact of a marriage she had helped destroy. It was a stolen heirloom. Penelope looked from the ring to Jonathan, her eyes wide with accusation. "You told me you had it commissioned for me," she whispered, her voice cracking. Jonathan sputtered. "I did. Catherine, you're twisting things. This is a malicious lie." "A lie?" Catherine's voice sharpened. "Sam!" Sam stepped forward, holding her tablet. On the screen was a crystal-clear image of Catherine's original, hand-drawn design sketches for the Star of Serenity. They were dated, signed K. Reyes, and watermarked. "The original design schematics, dated 2 years ago," Sam announced crisply, "along with the GIA certification for the stone, which lists the Reyes family trust as the original owner." Catherine continued, her focus now lasered onto Jonathan. "And as for how you commissioned it, let's talk about that. You didn't buy this ring, Jonathan. You stole it." "That's slander!" he snarled, his face contorting with rage. "Is it?" Catherine's calm was terrifying. "You used your executive discretionary fund to authorize a promotional transfer of the ring from the master vault to your possession. The transaction, number 7274B1, was processed at 4:15 p.m. 3 days ago. The stated purpose was for a showcase at a potential investor event. You forged the acquisition request, bypassing the standard multi-signature protocol required for any item valued over $1 million. You know the protocol because you wrote it." The level of detail was staggering. This wasn't an emotional outburst, it was an indictment. She was laying out a case for grand larceny in the middle of a 5-star restaurant. "The value of that ring is not what you paid, because you paid nothing. Its appraised insurance value is $28.5 million, or," Catherine stated, her voice resonating in the dead silent room. "You took a corporate asset, a piece of my family's history, and attempted to gift it to your mistress as a personal item. That's not just infidelity, Jonathan. That's embezzlement. That's fraud." Penelope let out a small, choked sob. Her dream had curdled into a sordid, criminal conspiracy. She looked at the diamond, and it no longer looked beautiful. It looked like evidence. It felt heavy, tainted, a millstone that could drag her down with him. Jonathan was cornered. His bluster had evaporated, leaving behind the raw panic of a man whose carefully constructed world was imploding in real time. He looked around the room, at the faces of his peers, his investors, his friends. He saw no support, only shock, disgust, and the cold, unforgiving judgment of his social and financial equals. Mr. Bartholomew was slowly shaking his head, a look of profound disappointment on his aged face. "You," Jonathan stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Catherine. "You will regret this. I built this company while you were hiding in your workshop." A humorless smile touched Catherine's lips. "That is the biggest lie of all," she said, her voice dropping, becoming intensely personal. "You didn't build anything, Jonathan. You were the auctioneer. I was the artist. You sold the paintings. I bled the paint onto the canvas. You took the credit for my work, for my father's legacy. You thought I was a silent partner you could control. You thought I was just a name. But you forgot something." She took a step closer, her eyes boring into his. "My name is on the building. My name is on the box. And my name is on every single share that gives you the power you so arrogantly flaunt. You are an employee, Jonathan, and your performance review is long overdue." The finality of Catherine's words hung in the air like the silence after a lightning strike. The illusion of Jonathan Davenport, the master of the universe, the charismatic CEO, had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. He was left exposed, a common thief and an adulterer, stripped of his power and prestige in front of the very audience he had sought to impress. The room, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell into a profound, uncomfortable quiet. The only sound was the distant clatter of a dropped fork from the kitchen. No one dared to speak. They were witnesses to a complete and total annihilation, executed with the cold precision of a surgeon. Jonathan's face cycled through a series of emotions: rage, denial, fear, and finally, a pathetic, pleading desperation. "Catherine, please," he whispered, the sound pathetic in the vast silence. "Not here. We can fix this." "There is nothing to fix," Catherine stated flatly. Her gaze was unflinching. "You broke it. And I don't repair broken things, Jonathan. I melt them down and create something new." It was then that Penelope made her move. With trembling hands, she reached up to her ear, unhooking a pair of diamond earrings, a gift from Jonathan last month. She placed them quietly on the table. Then she slipped off a delicate diamond bracelet, a birthday present. It joined the earrings. Her movements were jerky, frantic. She was shedding the gilded skin he had given her, desperate to distance herself from his toxicity, from the impending wreckage. Finally, she looked at the Star of Serenity, still in its box in Jonathan's hand. She wouldn't even touch it. She looked at Jonathan, her face a mask of revulsion and betrayal. "You used me," she said, her voice thick with tears. "You told me she was nobody. You told me this was our future. It was. It is," Jonathan pleaded, turning to her. But his words were hollow. "No," Penelope said, shaking her head as she backed away from the table. "This is your mess. I want no part of it." With a final, mortified glance at Catherine, she turned and fled, weaving through the tables of stunned onlookers and disappearing out the front door, her emerald dress a streak of color vanishing into the night. She left her glass of champagne, her half-eaten meal, and her entire fantasy life behind on the table. Jonathan was now truly alone. He stood, a pariah at his own party, clutching the multi-million-dollar ring that had become a symbol of his ruin. He turned his fury back to Catherine. "You think you can just waltz in here and ruin me? I am the CEO of Reyes Jewels. I have contracts. I have a board." "About that," Catherine interrupted smoothly. "As the majority shareholder, holding 75% of the voting stock, which I inherited directly from my father, and which our prenuptial agreement, which you called a mere formality, keeps securely in my name. I have the authority to call an emergency session of the board. In fact, I did so an hour ago, via a secure video conference. Sam held up her tablet again. This time, it showed the faces of the 4 other board members in a live video call, each looking grim and resolute. "They've all seen the preliminary evidence of your financial malfeasance, Jonathan," Catherine continued, her tone chillingly professional. "They've seen the unauthorized transfer logs. They've also been made aware of the blatant misuse of company assets for personal gain, which constitutes a severe breach of your fiduciary duty and your employment contract. As of 5 minutes ago, the board voted unanimously. Your position as CEO of Reyes Jewels is terminated, effective immediately. Your corporate accounts have been frozen. The security codes to your office have been changed. The locks on our home will be changed within the hour." 2 large, imposing men in dark suits who had entered the restaurant discreetly a few moments earlier now stepped forward. They were not restaurant security. They had the hard, professional look of a private corporate security detail. Sam had summoned them. "These gentlemen will escort you off the premises," Catherine said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Your personal effects from the office will be couriered to a location of your choosing. You are no longer welcome in any Reyes Jewels establishment. You are no longer welcome in my life." One of the security men gently but firmly took the velvet box from Jonathan's nerveless grasp and handed it to Catherine. She accepted it without a word. Jonathan stared at her, his mouth agape. He was defeated. He had no moves left to make. The empire he had boasted of building had cast him out. The woman he had dismissed as a fragile artist had checkmated him in public. He was nothing. As the security guards flanked him and began to lead him towards the exit, he shot one last, venomous look at Catherine. "You'll be nothing without me. You'll run it into the ground." Catherine simply watched him go, her expression serene. The crowd parted as the disgraced CEO was escorted out like a common criminal. When the door swung shut behind him, a collective breath was released. The performance was over. Catherine stood for a moment, the velvet box in her hand. Then she turned to the stunned room. She looked directly at Mr. Bartholomew, who raised his wine glass in a silent, respectful toast. Catherine gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Then she addressed the room. "My apologies for the interruption," she said, her voice calm and strong. "Please enjoy your evening. And don't forget to give generously to the Gems of the City Fund. The arts are a worthy investment." With that, she turned, and with Sam at her side, she walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind the wreckage of her old life to step into the dawn of her new one. 6 months later, the air in the Reyes Jewels flagship store on Fifth Avenue was electric. The scandal at La Lanterne d'Or had become the stuff of New York legend, a tale of corporate intrigue and personal justice that had paradoxically been the best publicity the brand could have ever hoped for. The story wasn't just about a cheating husband. It was about the quiet, brilliant woman who had reclaimed her throne. Catherine Reyes was no longer the reclusive artist behind the brand. She was its fierce, celebrated heart. The store was packed for the unveiling of her newest collection, the Phoenix. It was her first solo collection as both Chief Creative Officer and CEO, and the industry was watching with bated breath. They were not disappointed. The pieces were bold, innovative, and deeply personal. They spoke of fire, of rebirth, of strength forged in adversity. Critics raved, calling it her masterwork. Sales had skyrocketed. Catherine had not just saved her company from her husband. She had made it more successful than ever. Jonathan Davenport had faded into obscurity. Mired in lawsuits and facing federal fraud charges, he had become a social and professional pariah. His name was a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Penelope Vance had reportedly moved back to Ohio, her New York ambitions reduced to ash. In her private workshop, the one place that had always been her sanctuary, Catherine stood before her workbench. The chaos of the past few months had settled, and she was left with a profound sense of peace and purpose. Sam came in, holding 2 flutes of champagne. "To the Phoenix," Sam said, handing Catherine a glass. "We've already sold out of the centerpiece necklace. A Saudi princess bought it over the phone." Catherine smiled, a genuine, untroubled smile. "To the Phoenix," she echoed, clinking her glass against Sam's. "And to good friends who bring you champagne and help you stage corporate coups." They both laughed, a warm, easy sound. After Sam left, Catherine turned her attention to a velvet tray on her bench. On it lay the Star of Serenity. For months, she hadn't been able to look at it. It was a monument to her pain, a symbol of the deepest betrayal. She had considered selling it, breaking it down, locking it away forever. But that would be letting Jonathan win. It would mean he had succeeded in tainting it. Her father had taught her that every stone has a story. This stone's story had taken a dark turn, but she was the author, and she could write a new chapter. With the careful, practiced hands of a master, she began to work. She removed the magnificent blue diamond from its setting, the platinum band, the one meant to symbolize their intertwined lives, she placed into a crucible. She turned up the flame of her torch and watched as the metal that represented 19 years of lies softened, glowed, and melted into a formless, liquid silver pool. It was a catharsis. She spent the next few weeks redesigning. She took the 19 smaller diamonds, the ones that had marked each year of their marriage, and set them into a new piece. A magnificent brooch in the shape of a rising phoenix, its wings spread wide. It was a gift for Sam, a thank you for her unwavering loyalty. The Star of Serenity diamond itself she set into a new, singular piece. Not a ring to be given by a man, but a pendant. The design was simple, powerful, and utterly modern. The diamond was now the heart of a stylized star, its platinum points sharp and clean. It was no longer a symbol of a partnership, but a declaration of a single, brilliant entity. It was a symbol of her own light, her own resilience. It was no longer the Star of Serenity. She renamed it the Polaris, the North Star, constant, true, and a guide for one's own journey. She clasped the finished pendant around her own neck. It lay cool against her skin. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, not at a woman who had survived, but at a woman who had triumphed. The pain was a part of her story, a facet that had been cut into her, but it no longer defined her. It had simply added to her brilliance. Her legacy was not just her father's, and it was certainly not Jonathan's. It was hers, reclaimed and reforged in fire. And as the blue diamond on her chest caught the light, it sparkled with the promise of a future that was entirely and beautifully her own. A year had passed since the night at La Lanterne d'Or, a year of rebuilding, not just a company, but a life. The penthouse, once a monument to a shared and hollow success, was now entirely Catherine's. She had stripped it of Jonathan's heavy, masculine aesthetic, replacing dark woods and somber leathers with clean lines, soft textures, and an abundance of light. It was no longer a showroom, but a home, filled with art that inspired her, and silence that comforted her. One cool autumn evening, As a gentle rain whispered against the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, Catherine was reviewing the preliminary sketches for the next spring collection. The Polaris pendant, her personal emblem of victory, lay against her silk blouse, a familiar, cool weight. Her work was her joy now, unburdened by the need to please or accommodate anyone but her own creative vision. The company was stronger than ever, its narrative of authenticity and female strength resonating with a new generation of clients. The intercom buzzed, a harsh intrusion into the tranquility. She frowned, not expecting anyone. It was Wesley, the stern but protective doorman who had worked in the building for 2 decades. "Mrs. Reyes," his voice was strained, apologetic. "I am so sorry to disturb you. There is a man here, a Mr. Davenport. He is asking to see you. I told him you are not accepting visitors, but he is insistent." Catherine's blood ran cold for a single, fleeting moment. Jonathan. The name felt alien, a relic from a past life. She hadn't seen or heard from him since his unceremonious exit from the restaurant. His lawyers had communicated with hers, a sterile and bitter exchange that had finalized their divorce and settled the criminal charges with a plea deal that involved hefty fines and a permanent ban from the financial industry. He had, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist in her world. "Wesley, you know my instructions," she said, her voice steady. "Yes, ma'am, I do. But he says it is a matter of life and death. He looks unwell, Mrs. Reyes. I would not have called otherwise." A part of her, the logical, self-protective part championed by Sam, screamed to refuse, to have Wesley call security and have him removed. But another, deeper part of her felt a strange sense of obligation, not to him, but to the woman she was now. A queen does not hide from ghosts. She faces them, and by facing them, banishes them from her kingdom for good. This was the final piece of unfinished business. "It's all right, Wesley," she said, her decision made. "Send him up." A few minutes later, the chime of the private elevator announced his arrival. Catherine stood in the center of her living room, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. When the doors slid open, the man who stepped out was a grotesque caricature of the Jonathan she had known. The impeccable Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by a rumpled, ill-fitting blazer. His face was gaunt, his skin had a pasty, unhealthy pallor, and the confident gleam in his eyes had been replaced by a haunted, desperate flicker. He was a man hollowed out from the inside, the architecture of his arrogance having collapsed, leaving only a ruin. He stopped, taking in the transformed apartment. "You've changed the place," he murmured, his voice raspy. "I have," Catherine replied, her tone neutral. "What do you want, Jonathan?" He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes pleading. "Catherine, I know I have no right to be here. I know I am the last person on earth you want to see." He wrung his hands, a nervous, pathetic gesture. "But I had to see you. To tell you I am sorry." Catherine remained silent, her expression unchanging. She had learned that a man like Jonathan only ever used the word sorry as a key to unlock a door he wanted to walk through. He seemed to take her silence as an invitation to continue. "I was a fool, Cat, a blind, arrogant fool. I had everything. We had everything. I let my ego, this chase for more, I let it poison me. And that woman, Penelope, she was nothing. A symptom of the disease, not the cause. A mistake. A terrible, meaningless mistake." He was trying to weave a narrative of a good man who had lost his way, hoping to appeal to a well of sympathy he assumed must still exist. He had always underestimated her. "I'm ruined, Catherine," he said, his voice cracking. "My reputation, my career, it's all gone. I have nothing. I needed to look you in the eye and tell you that I know what I lost. I lost you." Catherine finally spoke, her voice as calm and clear as the rain against the window. "What you lost, Jonathan, was a source of income. You lost a brand you could take credit for. You lost a wife who was convenient and quiet. You never had me. Not really. Because to have someone, you have to see them. And you never saw me. You saw a name, a legacy, an asset. You saw a walking, talking vault of intellectual property you could exploit." He flinched as if she had slapped him. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" she countered, taking a small step forward. "Your apology isn't about the pain you caused me. It's about the consequences you are suffering. You're not sorry for the betrayal. You're sorry you got caught. You're not here for my forgiveness. You're here for some kind of absolution so you can sleep at night. Or perhaps you're here for a handout." His desperate eyes gave him away. That was the core of it. He was broken, and he had come back to the person he had broken, hoping she had a spare part for him. "I don't hate you, Jonathan," she said, and the words surprised him. They surprised her a little, too. Hate requires passion. It requires energy. And you are no longer worth my energy. When I look at you, I don't feel anger. I feel a profound pity. You had a seat at a banquet, and you chose to steal the silverware instead. You'll never understand what you truly threw away. She walked to the door of the apartment and held it open, a clear, final gesture. He looked at her, at the magnificent apartment, at the glittering city beyond the windows, a world he was no longer a part of. He saw the Polaris pendant at her throat, a stone he had tried to steal, now worn as her personal badge of honor. He saw a woman he had never known, a woman forged into steel in the fire he had set. Defeated, he shuffled past her without another word and stepped back into the elevator. Catherine watched as the doors slid shut, sealing him away. She closed the door to her home, the click of the latch echoing in the quiet room. It was the sound of the final sentence, of the final chapter of a long and painful book. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel sad. She felt light. The last echo of the lie was gone. The ghost was banished. She walked back to the window, looking down at the endless tapestry of lights that was New York City. It was her city, her business, her life. And for the first time, with no shadows of the past lurking at her door, it was entirely and completely hers to command. That night at the restaurant wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the birth of an icon. Catherine Reyes reminded us that a person's true worth is never defined by someone else's betrayal. It's defined by how they rise from the ashes. Jonathan thought he was taking everything from her, but he only succeeded in giving her back the one thing he had stolen over the years, her own power. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that sometimes the most devastating moments of our lives are just setting the stage for our greatest comeback. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate power move? Could you have been as calm and calculated as she was? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of justice and empowerment, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will leave you breathless. Thank you for listening. He was a titan of industry, a man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will. She was his elegant, intelligent wife, the silent architect of his empire. But in the glittering, hollow world of New York's elite, loyalty is a commodity, and respect is a luxury not everyone can afford. One fateful night, at the city's most prestigious charity gala, under the watchful eyes of the powerful and the privileged, he made a choice. To appease his new flame, a woman draped in diamonds and ambition, he raised his hand to the wife who had built him. A single, sharp slap that echoed louder than the orchestra. He thought it was the end of an argument. He had no idea it was the beginning of his end, because while he slept soundly that night, she was igniting a fire that would burn his entire world to the ground. The Starlight Charity Gala was the apex of the Manhattan social calendar, a glittering spectacle held in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small carriage, dripped light onto a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a string quartet. To the outside world, Damien and Catherine Blackwood were the evening's reigning couple. He, the CEO of Blackwood Innovations, a tech behemoth he'd built from the ground up, was a man carved from ambition and arrogance. His jaw was sharp, his eyes a cold, calculating blue, and his smile a weapon he wielded with practiced ease. Catherine, his wife of 10 years, was his perfect counterpart, or so it seemed. Graceful and poised, with intelligent hazel eyes that saw far more than they let on, she possessed a quiet strength that most people mistook for meekness. She wore an emerald silk gown that shimmered like liquid moonlight, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. She had been the first investor in Damien's dream, not with money, but with intellect. Her Wharton MBA and razor-sharp strategic mind had transformed his raw coding talent into a multi-billion-dollar empire. She had drafted the business plans, navigated the early-stage funding rounds, and architected the corporate structure. He was the face. She was the foundation. A foundation he had begun to treat as little more than pavement to be trod upon. The source of that disrespect was currently clinging to his arm, a vibrant slash of crimson in the muted elegance of the ballroom. Her name was Seraphina Monroe, a model-turned-influencer whose ambition was as sharp and dangerous as the stilettos on her feet. She laughed a little too loudly, her scarlet lips perpetually curved in a predatory smile. She was everything Catherine was not, ostentatious, demanding, and utterly transparent in her desires. And Damien, a man terrified of losing the status he'd fought so ruthlessly to attain, was utterly captivated by her public performance of adoration. "Darling," Seraphina purred, her fingers tracing the lapel of Damien's Tom Ford tuxedo. "Mr. Abernathy from the Times is watching us. We should give him something to write about." She tilted her head towards a corner where several high-profile investors, including the notoriously shrewd Robert Chen of Chen Capital, were in conversation. "Go on, Damien. Remind them who the king of this city is." Damien's chest puffed out. He thrived on such validation. Catherine watched, a familiar ache tightening in her chest. She saw the subtle way he preened under Seraphina's gaze, the way he subtly angled his body away from her, his own wife, as if she were a relic of a past he was eager to shed. "In a moment, my dear," Damien said, his eyes scanning the room. "First, I need to ensure everything is perfect." His gaze fell on Catherine. "Catherine, did you confirm the seating arrangement with the event planner? I specifically said I wanted to be at the same table as Senator Thompson." "Yes, Damien," Catherine replied, her voice calm and even, betraying none of her inner turmoil. "We are at table 1, with the Senator and Mrs. Thompson, as you requested. I confirmed it myself an hour ago." Seraphina let out a small, condescending laugh. "Always so efficient, aren't we? Like a perfect little assistant." The barb struck its target. Catherine's jaw tightened, but she refused to give Serafina the satisfaction of a reaction. Damien, however, either missed the malice or chose to ignore it. He was too focused on his own performance. For the next hour, Catherine played her role flawlessly. She smiled. She engaged in polite conversation about art auctions and summering in the Hamptons. She deflected intrusive questions about Damien's latest, rumored acquisition with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. All the while, she was acutely aware of Damien and Serafina, a garish duo moving through the crowd. She saw him whisper in Serafina's ear, saw the possessive hand he placed on the small of her back, a public declaration for all to see. The tension finally snapped later in the evening, near the marbled archway leading to the terrace. Catherine had been speaking with Marcus Thorne, the COO of Blackwood Innovations, and one of the few people who knew the true extent of her contributions to the company. "The quarterly projections are looking aggressive, Catherine," Marcus said, his voice low. "Damien is pushing the R&D department to its limits. I'm worried we're heading for a bubble." "I've seen the data, Marcus," she said quietly. "He's chasing headlines, not sustainable growth. I've warned him." "He doesn't listen to anyone anymore," Marcus lamented, his gaze flicking nervously towards Damien, who was approaching them with Serafina in tow. "What are you two whispering about?" Damien's voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. "Just discussing the quarterly numbers, Damien," Marcus said quickly. Serafina slid her arm around Damien's waist. "Don't let them bore you with business, darling. It's a party." She then looked directly at Catherine, her eyes glittering with malice. "You know, Catherine, you should really try to enjoy yourself. You look so tense. It adds years to your face." Catherine met her gaze, her composure unwavering. "Thank you for your concern, Serafina. But I find that worrying about the health of a $10 billion company is a more productive use of my time than worrying about a few wrinkles." The comeback was swift, precise, and it hit its mark. A flicker of fury crossed Serafina's perfectly made-up face. She turned to Damien, her lower lip trembling theatrically. "Damien, did you hear that? She's insulting me. She's always so cold, so superior." Damien's face darkened. In his mind, Catherine's sharp intellect, once his greatest asset, had become a threat. Her quiet competence felt like a judgment on his loud insecurities. Serafina's manufactured vulnerability was a balm to his fragile ego. He looked from Serafina's pouting face to Catherine's calm, unreadable expression. In front of Marcus, in front of anyone who might be watching from the periphery, he needed to assert his authority. He needed to prove who held the power. "Apologize to her, Catherine," he commanded, his voice low and menacing. Catherine's blood ran cold. "I will not. I have nothing to apologize for." I said, "Apologize." "No, Damien." It was her quiet defiance that broke him. It was the fact that she wasn't cowering. She wasn't afraid. To him it felt like the ultimate betrayal. He saw Serafina looking at him, her eyes wide, waiting. He felt the phantom eyes of the entire New York elite upon him. In that single, terrible moment, his vanity and his cruelty won. He raised his hand. The sound of the slap was sharp, a brutal crack that cut through the murmur of the gala. Catherine's head snapped to the side, the sting blossoming on her cheek like a hot, poisonous flower. A collective gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity. Marcus Thorne froze, his face a mask of horror. For a moment, there was absolute silence, a pocket of stunned disbelief in the heart of the opulent ballroom. Catherine slowly turned her head back to face him. There were no tears in her eyes. There was only a terrifying, crystalline clarity. She looked at Damien, not as her husband, but as a stranger, an enemy. She saw the flicker of shock in his own eyes, as if his hand had acted of its own accord, quickly replaced by a stubborn, defensive glare. She looked at Serafina, who had the decency to look momentarily stunned before a flicker of triumph settled in her eyes. Without a word, Catherine turned and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't stumble. Her back was straight, her head held high. Each step was deliberate, measured, taking her away from the wreckage of her marriage, through the sea of shocked and whispering faces, and out of the grand ballroom into the cool night air. Damien watched her go, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach, but he pushed it down. He had made his point. He had asserted his dominance. He turned to a shaken Serafina and forced a smile. "Now, where were we?" he asked, his voice a little too loud, a little too brittle. He had no idea that the sound of that slap was not an ending, but the starting pistol for a war he was utterly unprepared to fight. The taxi ride from the Pierre to their Upper East Side penthouse was a blur of city lights smearing against the cold glass. Catherine sat perfectly still in the back seat, one hand resting in her lap, the other pressed against the lingering, phantom heat on her cheek. The sting had subsided, replaced by a profound and chilling numbness. It was the numbness of a limb that has been severed, the shock preceding the agony. She felt strangely disconnected from the woman in the emerald gown, the woman who had just been publicly humiliated by her own husband. That woman was a character she had played for a decade. Tonight, the performance had ended. When the taxi pulled up to the imposing limestone facade of their building, the doorman, a kind-faced man named George, rushed to open her door. "Good evening, Mrs. Blackwood. You're home early." His eyes widened slightly as he saw her face, the faint red mark just beginning to bloom on her cheekbone. To his credit, his professional mask didn't slip. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, George. Thank you," she said, her voice a monotone. But as she walked across the marble lobby, she knew nothing would ever be fine again. The private elevator opened directly into their penthouse. It was a monument to Damien's success, a sprawling space of glass, chrome, and minimalist furniture, with a panoramic view of Central Park. It was cold, impersonal, and curated for magazine spreads. It had never felt like a home. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. She walked through the silent, cavernous rooms, her heels clicking an unnervingly loud rhythm on the polished concrete floors. She didn't cry. The time for tears felt 1,000 miles away. What she felt instead was a slow, creeping rage, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. It wasn't the wild, screaming rage of a wounded animal. It was the focused, calculating fury of a grandmaster whose opponent has just made a fatal, unforgivable blunder. The slap wasn't the cause. It was the catalyst. It was the physical manifestation of 1,000 smaller betrayals, 1,000,000 moments of being diminished, ignored, and taken for granted. It was the culmination of every time he had taken credit for her ideas, dismissed her concerns as nagging, and paraded his affairs as trophies of his masculine prowess. He hadn't just struck her. He had tried to erase her. She walked into their shared walk-in closet, a space larger than most New York apartments. On one side were Damien's meticulously organized rows of designer suits and shoes. On the other, her own collection of elegant, understated pieces. She ignored them all. She went to the back, to a locked safe, hidden behind a full-length mirror. She keyed in the code, not their anniversary, not his birthday, but the date she had finalized the patent for the core algorithm that had launched Blackwood Innovations. An algorithm she had written. Inside the safe were her personal documents, some jewelry, and a sleek, encrypted hard drive. She took only the hard drive and a single, slim folio of documents. She then walked into the master bedroom and took a small, leather-bound journal from her nightstand. It was filled with her handwriting, notes, ideas, and strategic plans for the company, many of which Damien had later presented as his own. She didn't pack a suitcase full of clothes. That was what a fleeing victim did. She was not a victim. She was a combatant preparing for battle. She took only a single, expensive-looking leather duffel bag. Into it, she placed the hard drive, the journal, the folio, her laptop, and a toiletry bag with only the essentials. The emerald gown she was wearing felt like a costume from another life. She stripped it off, letting it pool on the floor like a shed skin. She changed into a simple, severe black pantsuit, a crisp white silk blouse, and practical, low-heeled Chanel pumps. It was armor. Her phone buzzed. It was Damien. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Texts began to pour in. "Catherine, where are you? We need to talk. You're overreacting." The final one, sent minutes later, was the most telling. "Don't do anything stupid. Think of the company's reputation." His reputation. Not her pain, not their marriage. The company, the entity she had built. A bitter smile touched her lips. Oh, she was thinking of the company. She was thinking of it very, very carefully. She made one phone call. Jessica Riley, a sharp, alert voice, answered on the second ring, despite the late hour. Jessica was her oldest friend, a shark of a divorce lawyer from the prestigious firm of Cromwell, Stern and Vance. The Vance was her father. "Jess, it's me." "Kat, what's wrong? I heard what happened at the gala. My colleague David was there. He called me." "Are you okay?" "He slapped me, Jess. In public." Catherine's voice was steady, devoid of self-pity. There was a pause, and then Jessica's voice turned to steel. "Where are you?" "At the penthouse. I'm leaving now." "Good. Don't engage with him. Don't answer his calls. Where are you going?" "I've booked a suite at the Carlyle, under my maiden name." Vance. The name felt good on her tongue. It was her own. "Okay. I'll meet you there in 40 minutes. We'll start the paperwork." "No," Catherine said firmly. "This isn't about divorce papers. Not yet. That's a skirmish. I'm planning a war." Jessica was silent for a moment, processing. She knew Catherine better than anyone. She knew her friend's calm exterior hid a formidable intellect and an iron will. "Okay," she said slowly. "What's the first move?" "I'm going to need you to look over a non-disclosure agreement. A very, very restrictive one. And I need to get in touch with an old acquaintance. I need you to find the best way to arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning. An urgent one." She took a deep breath. "The name is Alexander Sterling, of Sterling Capital." Jessica let out a low whistle. Alexander Sterling was a legend on Wall Street, a so-called vulture capitalist to his enemies, a visionary investor to his allies. His firm was known for aggressive, often hostile, takeovers of undervalued or poorly managed tech companies. They were also Blackwood Innovation's most feared competitor. "Sterling," Jessica said, her voice a mix of shock and admiration. "Kat, what are you planning?" "Damien thinks the company is his greatest strength," Catherine said, walking towards the elevator, her duffel bag in hand. "He's about to find out that it's his greatest vulnerability, and I know where all the cracks are. After all, I'm the one who papered over them." She ended the call, stepped into the elevator, and descended from the glass tower for the last time. As the door slid shut, she caught her reflection in the polished steel. The woman staring back at her was not the broken wife of Damien Blackwood. It was Catherine Vance, and she was ready to reclaim everything he had taken from her, and more. The shattering was over. The reconstruction was about to begin. The Carlisle Hotel, with its old-world elegance and discreet service, was a world away from the cold modernity of Damien's penthouse. It was a fortress of quiet luxury, the perfect staging ground for what was to come. Catherine's suite, registered under the name Vance, was opulent but comforting, with heavy silk curtains and classic furniture that seemed to absorb the sounds and chaos of the city outside. She didn't sleep. Fueled by adrenaline and 2 decades of suppressed ambition, she worked through the night. Her laptop was open, the encrypted hard drive connected. On the screen were the unvarnished truths of Blackwood Innovations, not the polished PR-spun versions presented to shareholders, but the raw data, suppressed R&D failures, over-leveraged acquisitions, and most damningly, a series of creative accounting practices Damien had insisted upon to inflate their quarterly earnings. Catherine had argued against them, warning that they were a house of cards. Now she was grateful for his arrogance. He had handed her the very wind she needed to blow it all down. Beside the laptop lay her leather-bound journal. She methodically cross-referenced her handwritten notes, strategic plans, market analysis, software architecture ideas, with the company's official development roadmaps. The evidence was irrefutable. Dozens of key innovations, patents and strategic partnerships that Damien had publicly claimed as his own vision had originated in detail from her private notes. She had been the ghost in his machine, the architect of his throne. At 7 a.m. Jessica arrived, looking sharp and alert in a navy blue suit. She carried a briefcase and 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Catherine, her eyes scanning her friend's face. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed. "Sleep is a luxury for peacetime, Jess," Catherine replied, taking a sip of the coffee. "Did you make the call?" Jessica nodded, setting her briefcase on the mahogany desk. "It wasn't easy. Alexander Sterling's schedule is locked down tighter than Fort Knox, but the name Vance, coupled with urgent, time-sensitive intelligence on Blackwood Innovations, got his attention. He's cleared his calendar. We have a meeting at his office, 10 a.m. sharp." "Good," Catherine said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "That gives us time to prepare the presentation." "Kat, are you sure about this?" Jessica asked, her professional caution warring with her personal loyalty. "Going to Sterling. It's like handing a starving wolf the keys to the henhouse. Once you let him in, you can't control what he does." "I'm not looking for control, Jess. I'm looking for a wrecking ball," Catherine stated coldly. "Damien respects only one thing: power, financial power. I'm going to bring a power to his door, so overwhelming that he'll have no choice but to bow. Alexander Sterling is not a partner. He is a weapon." She turned the laptop screen towards Jessica. For the next 2 hours, Catherine walked her friend through the vulnerabilities of Blackwood Innovations. She spoke with a passion and authority Jessica hadn't seen in years. This was the Catherine from Wharton, the brilliant strategist who could dissect a balance sheet like a surgeon. She explained how Damien's aggressive push into volatile markets had left the company dangerously exposed, how the inflated profit margins were hiding a growing debt crisis, and how their most recent flagship product, the Prometheus AI, was built on a flawed and unstable code base, a shortcut Damien had demanded against her explicit advice. "He's running a multi-billion-dollar company like a gambler on a hot streak," Catherine concluded, her voice steely. "But the streak is about to end, and I have the data to prove it." At 9:30 a.m. they left the Carlisle. Catherine wore the same black power suit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. The faint bruise on her cheek was visible, unconcealed by makeup. It was not a mark of shame. It was a testament, a piece of evidence. Sterling Capital was located in a sleek, imposing skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, a steel and glass needle aimed at the heavens. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, all polished granite and hushed reverence. They were escorted to the top floor, to Alexander Sterling's private office. The man himself was waiting. Alexander Sterling was in his late 40s, with silvering temples and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was the antithesis of Damien. Where Damien was loud, Sterling was quiet. Where Damien wore his wealth like a costume, Sterling wore his bespoke suit with an air of complete, unstudied indifference. He radiated a calm, predatory confidence that was far more intimidating than Damien's bluster. He did not smile as they entered. He simply watched, his sharp gaze missing nothing. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a low baritone. He gestured to the chairs opposite his vast, uncluttered desk. "Your lawyer's message was intriguing." His eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to the mark on her cheek, but his expression remained impassive. Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for seeing us on such short notice. I believe I have information that will be of significant value to you and your firm." She didn't wait for permission. She placed her laptop on the desk, opened it, and began. She didn't speak of her marriage, of the gala, of the slap. She spoke the language he understood, numbers, data, and strategy. She laid bare the weaknesses of Blackwood Innovations with clinical precision. She presented the inflated earnings reports next to the real, grim figures from her hard drive. She detailed the structural flaws in the Prometheus AI, predicting a catastrophic failure within the next 6 months that would trigger a massive stock devaluation. Finally, she brought up her masterstroke. Damien is currently in final negotiations to acquire a smaller AI firm, Cygnus AI, for $2 billion, she explained, displaying the confidential deal memo she had downloaded. He sees it as a vanity project, but my analysis shows that Cygnus AI's patent portfolio, when combined with Blackwood's existing infrastructure, doesn't create synergy. It creates a redundancy that will cost $500 million in restructuring alone. He is paying a premium for a company whose core technology will be obsolete within 18 months. He is hemorrhaging capital for ego. Alexander Sterling leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his fingers steepled. He had not interrupted her once. He had simply listened, his sharp eyes following every chart, every projection. The silence in the room was absolute. "This is comprehensive," he said finally, the single word carrying more weight than a dozen compliments. "You're suggesting Blackwood is a house of cards." "I'm stating it as a fact," Catherine corrected him gently. "And I'm offering you the opportunity to be the one holding the fan when it comes time to blow." Sterling leaned back in his chair, his gaze analytical, searching. "Why come to me? You're his wife. A messy divorce. You could take him for half. Why burn the whole kingdom down?" For the first time, Catherine allowed a flicker of personal history to enter her voice. "Because I helped build that kingdom, Mr. Sterling, and my name is not on a single brick. Damien Blackwood believes he is the sole architect. He has forgotten the importance of a strong foundation. I am not here for alimony. I'm not here for a settlement." She paused, letting her words hang in the air before delivering the final, devastating blow. "I am here for equity. I will provide you with the blueprint to acquire his company at a fraction of its current market value. In return, when Sterling Capital takes control, I want a senior executive position, a seat on the new board, and a significant stake in the restructured company. I am not selling my revenge, Mr. Sterling. I am leveraging my intellectual property." Alexander Sterling looked at her, and for the first time, a slow, appreciative smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator recognizing a fellow hunter. He wasn't looking at a scorned wife. He was looking at his next, and perhaps most brilliant, business partner. "Miss Vance," he said, extending a hand across the desk. "I believe we have a deal." Damien Blackwood arrived at the headquarters of Blackwood Innovations at 9 a.m., feeling triumphant. The night had been a blur of champagne and fawning admirers after Catherine's dramatic exit. Serafina had been suitably impressed by his show of strength, and her flattery had soothed his bruised ego. He'd woken up that morning with a mild hangover and a sense of righteous indignation. Catherine's disobedience had been a public embarrassment, but he had handled it. He had put her in her place. He expected she was holed up in some hotel, crying, ready to come crawling back with a tearful apology. He'd make her sweat for a day or two before graciously allowing her to return. He strode through the gleaming lobby, nodding curtly at the employees who scurried out of his way. "Morning, Mr. Blackwood," they'd murmur. He was the king in his castle, the master of his universe. His executive assistant, a perpetually nervous young woman named Clara, met him at his office door. "Good morning, sir. The board members are assembling for the 10 a.m. emergency meeting you called." "Excellent," Damien said, tossing his coat onto a chair. He'd called the meeting to fast-track the Cygnus AI acquisition, a move that would splash his face across every business journal. It was the perfect way to bury the gossip from last night's gala under a headline of corporate conquest. "Any messages?" "Your wife's lawyer called, sir. A Jessica Riley," Clara said, her eyes fixed on her tablet. "She said to inform you that Mrs. Blackwood, that Miss Vance, would be attending the board meeting." Damien laughed, a short, sharp bark. "What? Is she coming to apologize in front of the board? A little dramatic, even for her." He dismissed the thought. She was probably bluffing, trying to rattle him. "Fine, let her come. It will be educational for her." At precisely 10 a.m., Damien entered the boardroom on the 50th floor. The room was designed to intimidate, with a long, black granite table and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. His board was assembled, a collection of stern, grey-haired men he'd carefully selected for their pliability. Marcus Thorne, the COO, sat among them, his face pale and drawn. He wouldn't meet Damien's eye. "Good morning, gentlemen," Damien began, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I've called you here today to finalize our acquisition of—" The boardroom doors swung open. Damien stopped mid-sentence, an annoyed frown forming on his face. And then he saw her. Catherine stood in the doorway. She was not the woman he had slapped last night. This was a different person entirely. Dressed in her severe black suit, her face composed and resolute, she radiated an aura of unshakable power. The bruise on her cheek was a stark, silent accusation. But she was not alone. Behind her stood Alexander Sterling. A wave of confusion and alarm rippled through the boardroom. Alexander Sterling was their rival, their boogeyman, the shark that circled their waters. His presence here was inexplicable, a violation of the natural order. "Catherine?" Damien stammered, his bravado vanishing in a puff of smoke. "What is this? What is he doing here?" "Good morning, Damien." "Gentlemen," Catherine said, her voice clear and steady as she walked into the room. She didn't take a seat. Instead, she stood at the opposite end of the table, commanding the room's attention. Alexander Sterling stood slightly behind her, a silent, imposing presence. "I apologize for the intrusion. I am here today not as your wife, Damien, but as a representative of a new business proposal. Mr. Sterling is here as my associate." Damien gaped at her. Business proposal? What are you talking about? This is a private board meeting. It's about to become a very public one if you don't listen, Catherine said calmly. She nodded to Jessica Riley, who had followed them in, and began handing a thick, bound document to each board member. Please take a look at the portfolio in front of you. It's an offer from Sterling Capital. The board members, their faces a mixture of confusion and intrigue, began to flip through the pages. A stunned silence descended upon the room, broken only by the rustle of paper. Damien stood up, his face turning a blotchy red. An offer? An offer for what? This is absurd. Security, get them out of here. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Blackwood. Alexander Sterling spoke for the first time, his voice dangerously soft. Because the document your board is currently reading is a preliminary, but very generous, tender offer to acquire a controlling interest in Blackwood Innovations. The blood drained from Damien's face. Acquire? You can't. Our stock is at an all-time high. Our valuation is a fantasy, Catherine cut in, her voice sharp as a razor. And that is why I am here. For the next 20 minutes, Catherine systematically and dispassionately dismantled the company she had helped build. She projected charts and figures onto the room's main screen from her laptop. She exposed the creative accounting, the hidden debt, the precarious market position. She walked them through the technical flaws of the Prometheus AI, predicting its inevitable and costly failure. Her delivery was flawless, her command of the facts absolute. The board members stared, mesmerized and horrified, as the woman they had only ever known as the CEO's quiet, pretty wife revealed herself to be the true master of their company's universe. And finally, Catherine said, her gaze locking onto Damien's, the Cygnus AI acquisition. She displayed the internal memo on the screen. A $2 billion vanity project that will indebt this company for a decade to acquire redundant technology. An act of such profound fiscal irresponsibility that it borders on corporate malfeasance. Robert Chen, the investor who had been present at the gala, looked up from the portfolio, his face grim. The offer from Sterling Capital is 30% above current market value. Given the irregularities Ms. Vance has just presented, this isn't just a generous offer. It's a lifeline. This is ridiculous, Damien roared, slamming his fist on the table. She's a liar, a bitter, scorned woman trying to destroy me. He turned on Catherine. You did this? To get back at me for last night? Catherine looked him dead in the eye. The entire room held its breath. Last night was not the reason, Damien, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. It was merely the permission slip I gave myself to do what was necessary. You built this company on my intellect, my strategies and my work. And when you were done, you decided I was disposable. She gestured to the board. I am simply demonstrating my value. The value you forgot. She turned back to the stunned board members. Gentlemen, Sterling Capital's offer is on the table for the next 48 hours. It is conditional on the immediate removal of Damien Blackwood as CEO and the cessation of the Cygnus AI acquisition. Should you accept, I will be overseeing the transition as part of the new management team. I know where the bodies are buried. I also know where the treasure is. She closed her laptop. The presentation was over. Damien stood, shaking with a rage that rendered him speechless. He looked at the faces of his board, men he thought he owned, and saw not loyalty, but cold, hard calculation. He saw them looking from his trembling form to Catherine's steel composure, and he knew, in that gut-wrenching moment, that he had already lost. Catherine and Alexander Sterling turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a bomb of their own making to detonate behind them. The fallout from the boardroom blitz was swift and brutal. Damien's world, once an impenetrable fortress of wealth and power, began to crumble with terrifying speed. He stormed out of the boardroom after Catherine and Sterling, his mind a maelstrom of fury and disbelief. He tried to rally his board, appealing to their loyalty, to their shared history, but it was useless. He was no longer speaking to friends. He was speaking to businessmen who had just been shown a lifeboat as their ship was taking on water. "Damien, be reasonable," Robert Chen had told him, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The woman just proved with data that our stock is overvalued by at least 40%. Sterling is offering a premium on that inflated price. If we refuse, and this information leaks, which it inevitably will, we'll be facing shareholder lawsuits that will tie us up in court for years. She's checkmated you." His first frantic call was to Serafina. He needed her comfort, her validation, her adoration. He found her at her apartment, surrounded by packed Louis Vuitton luggage. "What's all this?" he demanded, his voice strained. "Are you going somewhere?" Serafina didn't look up from a box of jewelry she was sorting. "I'm going to Milan for a few weeks. A new contract," she said, her tone cool and distant. "Milan? Now? I need you here," he exclaimed. "Catherine, she's trying to destroy me. She went to Alexander Sterling." Serafina finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I heard. It's all over the financial news feeds already. Sterling Capital launches hostile takeover bid for Blackwood Innovations." She shrugged, a delicate, dismissive gesture. "It sounds messy." "Messy? It's a war. And I need you by my side. We're a power couple, remember?" A small, cruel smile played on her lips. "Damien, darling," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We were a power couple when you had power. I attached myself to a rising star, not a falling one. A CEO in the middle of a hostile takeover, with his brilliant wife leading the charge against him. That's not a good look. It's embarrassing." The word hit him harder than the slap he'd delivered to Catherine. Embarrassing. That's what he was to her now. He realized with sickening clarity that he had never been more than a stepping stone, a means to an end. Her affection had been a transaction, and his value had just plummeted. "So that's it? You're just leaving?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Don't be so dramatic," she said, snapping the jewelry box shut. "Think of it as a strategic retreat. Call me when you've sorted out all of this." She brushed past him, her expensive perfume a final, cloying insult. He knew she would never answer his call. The rat was leaving the sinking ship. His next blow came from within his own company. He tried to lock down the company's servers, to hide the evidence Catherine had presented, but it was too late. He received a call from Marcus Thorne. "Marcus, I need you to initiate a digital lockdown. Erase the R&D logs from the last 6 months. Shred the quarterly variance reports." "I can't do that, Damien." Marcus's voice was firm, laced with a new kind of confidence. "What do you mean you can't? I'm still the CEO of this company. You work for me." "No, Damien, I work for the company, for the shareholders. And right now, the best thing for this company is a smooth transition of power," Marcus said. There was a pause. "I've already provided Ms. Vance and Mr. Sterling's legal team with the supplementary data they requested. The server logs, the internal emails, all of it. It corroborates her entire presentation." The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that Damien couldn't even speak. Marcus, his loyal COO, the man he'd promoted and trusted for years, had turned on him. "Why, Marcus?" he finally whispered. "Because she was right," Marcus said simply. "About everything. About the flawed code, about the Cygnus deal, about you. You stopped listening a long time ago, Damien. You were going to run this company into the ground out of sheer ego. Catherine, Ms. Vance, she's saving it, and all of our jobs along with it. I'm sorry, but my loyalty is to the house she built, not to the man who was trying to burn it down. The final nail in his coffin was the media. The story was too juicy to ignore. Billionaire CEO's wife teams with rival to seize control of empire, screamed the headlines. They painted Catherine as a wronged genius, a strategic mastermind reclaiming her legacy. They dug into her past, her academic achievements at Wharton, her early, uncredited role in the company's founding. She became a feminist icon overnight. Damien, in contrast, was portrayed as a fool and a brutish tyrant, the man who slapped his wife and lost his empire in the same week. The photo of Catherine leaving the gala, her face resolute, was plastered everywhere. The faint bruise was a symbol of his downfall. He holed up in his penthouse, the glass walls that had once felt like a symbol of his dominance, now feeling like a cage. He watched the stock ticker for Blackwood Innovations. The board, facing overwhelming pressure, had publicly announced they were entering into negotiations with Sterling Capital. The stock price, after a brief, panicked dip, had soared on the news of the acquisition and the promise of new, competent leadership. He was undone, utterly and completely. He had underestimated the woman who stood beside him for 10 years. He had mistaken her silence for submission, her grace for weakness. He had thought she was an accessory, a beautiful object to be displayed and, when necessary, disciplined. He never realized she was the queen, and he had just been a pawn in her long, patient game. The unraveling was complete. All that was left was the final, crushing silence of defeat. The 48 hours that followed the boardroom meeting were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and high-stakes negotiations, but the outcome was never in doubt. With Marcus Thorne's cooperation and the irrefutable data Catherine had provided, the board of Blackwood Innovations had no choice. They voted unanimously to accept Sterling Capital's offer. Damien Blackwood was officially and ignominiously terminated as CEO, forced to sell his shares as part of the deal. He was given a severance package dictated by the ironclad prenuptial agreement Catherine had insisted upon years ago, an agreement he had laughed at the time. It protected all premarital assets and intellectual property. As she was the source of nearly all the company's foundational IP, he was left with a fraction of the fortune he once commanded. He was still a rich man, but he was no longer a king. He was just another wealthy, forgotten casualty of Wall Street. The day the deal was finalized, Catherine walked back into the headquarters of the company she had built, not as the CEO's wife, but as the new chief strategy officer and a member of the board of directors for the newly formed entity, Sterling Blackwood. The atmosphere was electric. Employees who had once averted their eyes from her now looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. She was no longer a phantom in the hallways. She was the acknowledged power. Her first act was to call a company-wide town hall meeting. Standing on a stage in the building's atrium, she looked out at the hundreds of faces staring up at her. She didn't gloat. She didn't mention Damien's name. She spoke of the future. For too long, this company has chased short-term gains and fleeting headlines, she began, her voice resonating with a newfound authority. We have prioritized image over innovation, ego over excellence. That era is over. Starting today, we are returning to the principles that once made us great: sustainable growth, fearless research, and a commitment to building technology that lasts. She laid out her vision, a clear, concise, and brilliant roadmap for the company's next 5 years. She announced the immediate cancellation of the disastrous Cygnus AI acquisition, redirecting the funds into internal R&D and promoting several talented engineers whom Damien had overlooked. She answered questions from the floor with a depth of knowledge and a clarity of purpose that left no one in doubt as to who was now in charge. Marcus Thorne, who she had promoted to president and COO, stood by her side, a look of profound respect on his face. Later that day, she met with Alexander Sterling in her new office, the very office Damien had once occupied. It was already being transformed. The cold, minimalist furniture was being replaced with warmer, more functional pieces. The ostentatious modern art was gone, replaced with whiteboards covered in strategic diagrams. "A good first day, Miss Vance," Alexander said, leaning against the doorframe, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Please call me Catherine," she replied, looking up from a budget report. "Catherine," he acknowledged with a small smile. "The markets have responded well. The analysts are calling this the most elegant corporate takeover in a decade." "It wasn't about elegance," she said, her expression serious. "It was about correction, restoring balance." "Perhaps," he conceded, "but you can't deny there's a certain poetry to it." He looked at her, his usual predatory gaze softened by something else. Admiration. "I've acquired dozens of companies in my career. It's usually a bloody, messy affair. But with you, it was like watching a surgeon at work. You didn't use a cudgel, you used a scalpel." "Damien was the architect of his own downfall," Catherine said, unwilling to take full credit for his self-destruction. "I simply pointed out the structural flaws to the demolition team." Alexander chuckled, a rare, genuine sound. "A modest surgeon, then. I have a feeling this is going to be a very profitable partnership, Catherine." Their relationship remained strictly professional, yet a powerful current of mutual respect flowed between them. He valued her intellect, her foresight, her unwavering composure. She valued his decisiveness, his vast resources, and the fact that he never once underestimated her. He didn't see a woman. He saw a brilliant mind, a formidable ally. For Catherine, after a decade of being treated as an accessory, that respect was more valuable than any romance. That evening, she did not return to a hotel suite. She had purchased a beautiful brownstone in the West Village, a place with character and warmth, filled with books and art that she loved. It was hers, bought with the first payment from her new, staggering salary and signing bonus. As she unlocked her own front door, carrying a bag of groceries, a sense of profound peace washed over her. She wasn't just reclaiming her company, she was reclaiming her life, her name, her identity. The gilded cage was gone, its bars melted down and reforged into a key. The new dawn wasn't just for Sterling Blackwood. It was for Catherine Vance. And it was just beginning. 6 months passed. The transition at Sterling Blackwood was not just smooth, it was transformative. Under Catherine's strategic guidance and Marcus's operational management, the company flourished. She dismantled Damien's reckless projects, stabilized the company's finances, and fostered a new culture of genuine innovation. The flawed Prometheus AI was scrapped, and a new, more stable and powerful version, codenamed Phoenix, was already in development. Built on the solid foundation of her original architectural plans, the company's stock price didn't just recover, it reached unprecedented new heights. Catherine Vance became a legend in the business world. She was the subject of a glowing cover story in Forbes magazine, titled "The Architect: How Catherine Vance Rebuilt Her Empire." The article detailed her quiet but crucial role in the founding of Blackwood Innovations and her masterful strategy in seizing control. The accompanying photograph was of her in the new boardroom, poised and powerful, with Alexander Sterling looking on with clear admiration. She was no longer defined by her relationship with Damien. He was now a footnote in her story. Her relationship with Alexander had deepened into a formidable professional partnership and a quiet, budding friendship. They were intellectual equals who challenged and respected one another. There were hints of something more, shared dinners that lasted for hours, conversations that strayed from business to art, philosophy, and their pasts. But they were in no rush. For the first time in a long time, Catherine was building something for herself, on her own terms, and she was savoring every moment. One crisp autumn afternoon, Damien Blackwood sat alone at an outdoor cafe in a quiet, forgotten corner of Soho. His world had shrunk dramatically. The sycophants and hangers-on had vanished along with his CEO title. His invitations to galas and exclusive parties had dried up. He was a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at the very events he once dominated. Serafina had never called. He'd seen her once, photographed on the arm of a much older, much richer European industrialist. She hadn't even given him a second glance. He was scrolling through the news on his phone when he saw it. The cover of Forbes. He stared at the image of Catherine, his Catherine, looking more regal and confident than he had ever seen her. He read the headline, "The Architect." The word twisted in his gut. He read excerpts from the article, quotes from Marcus Thorne praising her vision, from industry analysts lauding her genius, from Alexander Sterling calling her his most valuable asset. There was a small, bitter paragraph about him, describing him as the ousted founder whose aggressive but reckless leadership had nearly ruined the company. He was the villain in her heroic tale. As he sat there, a wave of cold, hard clarity washed over him. He had never truly seen her. He had seen a wife, an assistant, a reflection of his own success. He had never seen the brilliant, formidable woman who had been standing beside him all along, holding up the pillars of his kingdom. The slap had not been a show of strength. It had been an act of catastrophic weakness, the desperate lashing out of an insecure man terrified of the power his wife quietly wielded. He looked up from his phone just as a black town car pulled up to the curb across the street. The rear door opened and Catherine stepped out, followed by Alexander Sterling. They were laughing about something, their heads close together. They were heading into a renowned art gallery. She looked radiant, energized, free. She didn't see him. He was invisible to her now, a ghost from a past life she had shed completely. He watched as Alexander held the gallery door open for her, the gesture one of casual, genuine respect. As she passed through the doorway, she turned and gave him a smile, not the practiced, polite smile she had worn for a decade as Mrs. Blackwood, but a real, brilliant smile that lit up her entire face. Damien felt a profound, aching emptiness that had nothing to do with money or status. It was the realization of what he had truly lost. He hadn't just lost a company. He had thrown away the one person who had seen greatness in him and had dedicated her own genius to making it a reality. He had shattered the most valuable thing he ever had, not with a single slap, but with 1,000 cuts of ego and neglect. He was left with his diminished fortune and his cavernous, empty penthouse. She had the company, the respect of her peers, and a future she was building for herself. The final reckoning was not a dramatic confrontation or a shouted argument. It was this, a quiet, undeniable truth settling upon him in a lonely cafe. He had slapped his wife to please his mistress, and the next day she had arrived with an army and calmly, methodically, taken back the world she had built, and he had no one to blame but himself. And so, Catherine Vance's story becomes a powerful lesson in value, respect, and the quiet strength that so many people underestimate. It's a reminder that the silent partner in the room is often the most powerful, and that true strength isn't about raising your voice or your hand, but about knowing your worth and having the courage to claim it. Damian Blackwood thought he was breaking his wife, but he only succeeded in breaking the chains that held back a titan. She didn't seek simple revenge. She sought reclamation, building a brighter future from the ashes of a painful past. What did you think of Catherine's incredible transformation? Was her boardroom takeover the ultimate power move? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by her story of resilience and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And of course, for more compelling stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next. Thank you for listening.